It was a cold December night, the kind where the wind howls like a restless spirit through the barren trees. I remember it vividly because what happened that night still haunts my dreams, turning them into nightmares. I was a college student back then, living in a small town known more for its eerie legends than its academic prowess. The town, shrouded in a perpetual mist during winters, was the perfect setting for the bizarre and the unexplainable. My friends and I, being fans of the supernatural, often exchanged ghost stories, but none of us ever thought we'd live one. That night, I was walking back to my dorm from the library. The streets were deserted, a thick fog reducing visibility to a few feet. The only sound was the crunch of frost under my boots and my own breathing, visible in the cold air. I remember feeling a sense of unease, an instinctual warning that something was amiss. As I passed the old cemetery, which was known to be haunted, I heard a faint whisper. Initially, I dismissed it as the wind, but it grew louder, more distinct. It was calling my name, a voice both unfamiliar and chillingly personal. My heart raced, and every rational thought told me to run, but curiosity rooted me to the spot. Peering into the fog, I saw a figure. It was a boy, no more than 10, dressed in clothes from another era. His eyes, dark and hollow, met mine, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. He beckoned me with a bony finger, his voice now a clear whisper in my ear, though he was still yards away. "Help me," he said. "Please, find me." Confused and terrified, I took a step back, but the boy vanished as suddenly as he appeared. Shaken, I hurried back to my dorm, trying to convince myself it was just a figment of my imagination. Back in the safety of my room, I tried to forget the incident, but sleep eluded me. The boy's plea echoed in my mind, a haunting mantra. The next morning, driven by a mix of fear and curiosity, I went to the local library to research the town's history. After hours of digging through old newspapers and dusty books, I stumbled upon a story from the early 1900s. It was about a young boy who had mysteriously disappeared one winter night, never to be found. The photo in the article made my blood run cold. It was him, the boy from the cemetery. Compelled to uncover the truth, I visited the cemetery again, this time in broad daylight. The grave of the boy, Peter, was there, marked by a small, weathered stone. It was said his family had buried an empty casket, hoping he would one day return. For weeks, I was obsessed with finding out what happened to Peter. I interviewed old residents, dug through archives, and spent nights in the cemetery, hoping for another encounter. And then, it happened again. On another cold December night, Peter appeared. This time, he led me to a secluded part of the cemetery, to a spot overrun with weeds. There, partially buried under the earth, were the remains of a small shoe, eerily similar to the ones Peter wore in the photograph. I alerted the authorities, and after an investigation, it was confirmed that the remains of a child were buried there. It was Peter. After over a century, his remains were finally given a proper burial. The town was abuzz with the news, but for me, it was a bittersweet resolution. I had helped a lost soul find peace, but the experience left me with a deep sense of melancholy. I often visit Peter's grave, wondering about the life he could have had, and the untold stories of others who might still be wandering, lost in the shadows. That cold December night changed me. I still look for the unexplainable, but now with a respectful fear and a hope that I can help, just like I did for Peter. The whispers of the past, it seems, are not always just the wind. Sometimes they are voices, calling out for someone to listen, to help them find their way home. On a cold December night, years ago, something happened that I still can't fully explain. It's a memory etched so deep in my mind, it feels like it happened yesterday. I'll share it with you now, in the simplest words I can. I was a young man then, only about 20, living in a small, isolated town surrounded by thick woods. The kind of place where everyone knows everyone and nothing ever happens. That night, the air was biting cold, the kind that seeps into your bones. The sky was clear, the stars like scattered diamonds against the black canvas. I was walking home from a friend's house, a journey I'd made countless times. As I walked, I noticed how unusually quiet it was. No wind, no rustling leaves, just silence. Then, from the corner of my eye, I saw something move. I turned, but there was nothing, just the shadows of the trees. I picked up my pace, feeling uneasy. When I got home, the house was dark and cold. My parents were away for the weekend. I made myself a cup of hot chocolate and settled in for the night, trying to shake off the unease. Just as I was about to go to bed, I heard a noise outside, like someone or something was scraping against the side of the house. I froze, listening. The scraping became more persistent, moving around the house. My heart was racing. I grabbed a flashlight and cautiously opened the front door. The cold air hit me like a wave, and the darkness outside seemed even more oppressive. Shining the light around, I saw nothing but the familiar surroundings. I was about to head back inside when I heard it. A faint whisper, almost like a hiss, coming from the woods. I couldn't make out the words, but it sounded like a voice. A chill ran down my spine. This wasn't right. The town was too small for strangers, and who would be out in the woods at this hour? I went back inside, locked the door, and tried to convince myself it was just an animal. But the scraping continued, now seemingly at the back of the house. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know what was out there. I went to the back door, flashlight in hand, and stepped outside. The backyard was bathed in the cold, silver light of the moon. Then I saw them, footprints in the snow, leading from the woods to my house, and then back again. They were too large to be an animal's. I followed them, my curiosity overpowering my fear. They led deeper into the woods, to a part I rarely ventured into. The trees here were older, their branches gnarled and twisted. The air felt colder, the silence deeper. The footprints stopped abruptly in a small clearing. I shone the light around, heart pounding. That's when I saw it, a small old cabin, half hidden by the trees. It looked ancient, like it had been there for decades, but I had never seen it before. As I approached, the door of the cabin creaked open. I hesitated, then stepped inside. The air was stale, and it was almost completely empty, save for a table and a chair. On the table was a book, old and worn. I picked it up, and as I flipped through the pages, a photo fell out. It was a picture of a family, dated back to the early 1900s. They looked like any other family except for one thing. Their eyes were all scratched out. A sense of dread washed over me. I heard a noise behind me and spun around, flashlight trembling in my hand. There was nothing there, just the empty cabin. I rushed out, heart racing, and ran back home without looking back. Once inside, I locked all the doors and windows, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I stayed up all night, jumping at every sound. When morning came, I went back to the woods to find the cabin, but it was gone. There was no sign it had ever been there. I told some people in town what had happened, but no one believed me. They said I must have imagined it, but I know what I saw, and I can't explain it. Since that night, I've never walked alone in the woods again. Sometimes, on cold December nights, I still hear the faint whispering from the woods and the scraping against the house. I don't know what it was or why it came to me, but I know it's still out there, somewhere, in the darkness of the woods. On a cold December night, something happened to me that I will never forget. It's a story that's haunted me ever since, and I feel it's time to share it, perhaps as a warning, or maybe just to get it off my chest. I was a college student then, staying in a small town known for its serene beauty and bitter winters. The town had a history, with old tales of strange happenings, but I never paid much attention to them. I was more concerned with my studies and the upcoming holidays. That night, the air was particularly biting. A thick layer of snow had covered everything, muffling the usual nocturnal sounds. My roommates had left for their homes to spend the holidays with their families, leaving me alone in our rented house near the edge of the woods. I was up late, around midnight, working on a term paper when the power went out. Not unusual for that area during winter, but the darkness felt more consuming than usual. I lit a candle and decided to check the fuse box in the basement, thinking it might be a simple trip. As I descended the creaky stairs, a sense of unease crept over me. The basement was unfinished, cluttered with old furniture and boxes, and it always gave me an uncomfortable feeling. I found the fuse box and flicked the switches, but the power remained off. That's when I heard it, a faint whisper, like someone breathing out words just beyond my ability to understand. I froze, straining my ears, thinking it might be the wind, but the sound was coming from within the basement. I turned, candle in hand, scanning the dimly lit corners. There, in the farthest corner, I saw a figure. It was a man, or what was left of one, pale and translucent, his eyes hollow. I stumbled back, heart racing. The figure didn't move towards me, but just stood there watching. I didn't know what to do, my mind racing with panic. The figure then whispered something, a name. Eleanor. The way he said it sent chills down my spine. It wasn't a plea, but more like an accusation. I bolted upstairs, locking the basement door behind me. I didn't sleep that night, the image of the ghostly figure etched in my mind. The next day, I asked the landlord about the house's history. Reluctantly, he told me a story from decades ago. A young woman named Eleanor had lived in the house. She had a suitor, a man who was deeply in love with her. But Eleanor didn't return his affections and eventually rejected him. Distraught, the man took his own life in the basement. Ever since, there were rumors that his spirit haunted the house, forever whispering Eleanor's name. The story chilled me to the bone. That night, and every night until I left for home, I heard the whispers. I never went back to the basement, and I never saw the figure again. But the whispers continued, a constant reminder of the tragedy that had occurred in that house. Since then, I've often wondered about the connection between the living and the dead. The experience left me with more questions than answers. Was it guilt that bound that spirit to the house, or something else? The cold December night when I encountered the ghost in my basement changed me. It was a brush with something beyond my understanding, a glimpse into a world that exists just beyond our perception. Sometimes, late at night, when the world is quiet and still, I think I can still hear a faint whisper, like a sigh carried on the wind, and I wonder if it's him, still searching, still longing for his Eleanor. It was a cold December night, the kind that chills you to the bone. The wind howled outside my window, carrying with it the eerie feeling of being watched. My name is Michael, and what I'm about to share with you is a true account of the most terrifying night of my life. The evening began uneventfully. I was home alone, my parents having gone to visit relatives for the weekend. As an 18-year-old, I relished the idea of having the house to myself. I spent the early part of the night watching TV and scrolling through my phone, completely unaware of the horror that awaited me. Around midnight, I decided to call it a night. The house, usually bustling with noise, felt unnaturally quiet. As I made my way to my bedroom, a sudden chill ran down my spine. I brushed it off as a draft and climbed into bed. No sooner had I closed my eyes than I heard it, a faint tapping sound coming from the window. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but the tapping persisted, rhythmic and deliberate. Curiosity overcame my initial fear, and I got up to investigate. Peering through the blinds, I saw nothing but the dark, snowy landscape of our backyard. Convinced I was imagining things, I returned to bed. But the moment I settled in, the tapping resumed. louder this time. My heart raced as I realized this was no ordinary night. I mustered the courage to look again, and what I saw froze me in place. There, standing in the snow, was a figure. It was too dark to make out details, but the silhouette looked human. Panic set in as I tried to rationalize the situation. Perhaps it was a lost traveler seeking help? I reached for my phone, intending to call the police, but it was dead. The power, too, had gone out, plunging my room into darkness. I felt trapped, isolated in my own home. Then, the unthinkable happened. The doorknob to my room began to turn slowly. I held my breath, praying it was just my imagination. But the door creaked open, revealing nothing but darkness on the other side. A cold gust of wind swept into the room, carrying with it a foul, unidentifiable odor. I scrambled under my bed, my entire body trembling with fear. The footsteps approached, heavy and deliberate. I could hear breathing now, ragged and guttural, as if whatever was in my room was struggling for air. Minutes passed, each second stretching into an eternity. The presence in my room felt malevolent, as if it had come with a purpose. I remembered the old tales my grandmother used to tell me about spirits that roamed the earth on cold December nights, seeking retribution. Just when I thought I couldn't bear the suspense any longer, the footsteps began to recede. The door creaked closed, and I was once again alone in my room. I waited, not daring to move until the first light of dawn crept through the blinds. When morning came, I emerged from my hiding spot, my body stiff and sore. The house was silent, just as I had left it the night before. But as I made my way to the living room, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. There, on the snowy path leading to our backyard, were footprints. Not just any footprints, but those of bare feet, leading up to my window and back into the woods. The police found nothing when they arrived, no sign of forced entry or disturbance. But I knew what I had seen and heard. To this day, I cannot explain who or what visited me that cold December night. But one thing is certain: it was a night of terror that I will never forget.